The massive chamber of the Galactic Council stretched out like a small city, filled with beings from every corner of known space. Towering crystal formations housed the Vorthak delegates, their bodies catching and refracting the chamber's artificial light into rainbow patterns. Floating pools of treated water held the Delphines, their graceful forms moving in slow, hypnotic circles. The insectoid Zephyrians occupied the upper galleries, their wings creating a constant low hum that had become as familiar as background music to regular council attendees. At the center of it all, in the section reserved for humanity, Ambassador Gina Park sat perfectly still. Her dark hair was pulled back in the traditional diplomatic style, and her formal blue uniform bore the insignia of Earth's United Territories. Around her, 26 other human representatives sat in similar silence, their hands folded, their faces blank. This was not normal. For 300 years, since humanity had first been granted a seat on the Galactic Council, they had been the most talkative species in known space. When the Krathan Empire wanted to expand into neutral territory, humans talked them out of it. When the mining guilds fought over asteroid rights, humans found compromise solutions that satisfied everyone. When ancient grudges threatened to spark wars between species that had been enemies for thousands of years, humans somehow convinced them to try peace instead. They talked constantly. They asked questions. They made suggestions. They offered solutions to problems that other species had given up on centuries ago. Some council members joked that humans would negotiate with a supernova if they thought it would listen. Today was different. Today, they sat like statues. Commander Minho Kim, Gina's military aide, stared straight ahead as the Vorthak trade representative clicked and chimed in the universal language, demanding answers about human shipping routes through the Kepler system. Normally, Minho would have pulled up holographic displays, shown trade agreements, explained the safety protocols that kept civilian ships away from military patrol zones. Instead, he said nothing. The Zephyrian war speaker buzzed down from the upper galleries, its metallic voice carrying the sharp tones of agitation. Humans of Earth territory, it called, your fleet movements in the Outer Rim require explanation. 3 battle groups have taken positions near our breeding colonies. Lieutenant Commander Ari Yoon, the human fleet liaison, did not even look up from her tablet. She made no gesture of acknowledgement. She might as well have been a piece of furniture. Across the chamber, the Delphine representative created complex patterns in the water with her tentacles, the movements spelling out urgent questions in their fluid language about trade disputes in the Centauri sector. Dr. Mina Seo, the human trade negotiator who had spent 15 years learning every Delphine dialect, watched the display with complete indifference. The council chairman, a tall being from the neutral collective species, activated his amplification system. His voice boomed across the vast chamber, designed to reach every gallery and booth and floating platform. Ambassador Park. The council requires your input on the territorial dispute in Sector 7. The Krathan claims salvage rights to 3 destroyed vessels. The Federation says those ships were in Federation space when they were attacked. Both sides have agreed to accept human mediation, as has been traditional for such matters. Every eye, sensor, and optical organ in the chamber focused on Gina. She was famous throughout the galaxy as the woman who had prevented the War of the Three Suns by talking for 18 straight hours until all parties agreed to her compromise solution. She was the human who had convinced the warrior poet Zephyrians to share mining rights with their ancient enemies through a combination of legal precedent and appealing to their sense of honor. She was the diplomat who never met a problem she could not solve with the right words. Gina's dark eyes met the chairman's gaze. Her expression was calm, almost peaceful. She said nothing. Minutes ticked by. The chamber's usual background noise of clicking, buzzing, rippling, and humming began to fade as more and more delegates realized something was wrong. The Vorthak stopped their crystalline chiming. The Zephyrians folded their wings. Even the Delphines ceased their graceful swimming. Ambassador Park, the chairman tried again. Do you require translation assistance? Technical support for your communication systems? Gina blinked slowly. She did not speak. Hours passed. Other delegates began presenting their own cases, arguing their positions, making the same speeches they had made for decades. But everyone kept glancing toward the human section, waiting for the inevitable moment when Gina or one of her team would stand up and offer to help find a solution. That moment never came. The Krathan representative, a massive being whose scales shifted color with emotion, turned his bulk toward the human section. Perhaps the humans are ill, he suggested, his voice carrying genuine concern. They have always been eager to involve themselves in our affairs. This silence is unusual. Captain Hyun Lee, the human military observer, sat motionless in his chair. His tablet displayed incoming messages from human colonies reporting Krathan ships massing near their borders, but he did not acknowledge them. He did not call for emergency sessions or demand explanations. He simply sat there, watching. As the day stretched on, a new feeling began to settle over the Galactic Council chambers. For centuries, they had taken human mediation for granted. When problems arose, humans would fix them. When tensions built, humans would ease them. When war threatened, humans would prevent it. Now, for the first time in galactic memory, humanity had nothing to say. The silence was deafening. The first cracks in galactic peace appeared exactly 21 days after humanity stopped talking. On a Tuesday morning, by Earth Standard Time, 3 Krathan battle cruisers crossed into Federation space without warning or explanation. They simply arrived at Mining Station Beta 7, powered up their weapons, and began charging their main guns. In the old days, this would have triggered dozens of emergency calls to human diplomatic ships. Ambassador Park's team would have rushed to the scene with proposals and counter-proposals. Human negotiators would have worked around the clock to find a solution that let both sides save face while avoiding bloodshed. This time, the distress calls went to empty space. Human communication networks remained active, but no one answered. The Federation commander at Beta 7 found himself facing 3 massive warships with no human mediator to call for help. Captain Hyun Lee stood on the bridge of the exploration vessel New Seoul, watching the tactical display with growing unease. His ship was officially a research vessel, equipped with scientific instruments and archaeological survey equipment. But like all human ships built in the last 50 years, it also carried military-grade shields and weapon systems. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and humans had learned long ago that sometimes good intentions were not enough. Captain, Lieutenant Sunmi Cho called from her communication station, "We're receiving multiple transmissions from the Vorthak fleet surrounding Research Station Kepler 9. Hyun looked out through the main viewer at the ring of crystalline ships that had appeared around the human research facility 3 hours ago. The Vorthak vessels were beautiful in their own way, like enormous cut gems that caught and reflected starlight in complex patterns. They were also heavily armed and had a reputation for taking what they wanted when diplomacy failed. "What are they saying?" Hyun asked, though he suspected he already knew. "Standard demands," Sunmi replied, her voice steady despite the tension on the bridge. "They claim the research station is interfering with their breeding migration routes. They want us to abandon the facility and remove all human presence from this system within 6 hours. 3 months ago, Hyun would have immediately opened communication channels with the Vorthak commander. He would have requested a formal meeting, reviewed the original territorial agreements, and looked for compromise solutions. He might have suggested moving the research station to a different orbit, or offered to share the scientific data the humans were collecting, or proposed a joint research mission that benefited both species. He had been good at that kind of negotiation. Most humans were. It was what they did. "Are they threatening to attack if we don't comply?" Hyun asked. "Yes, sir. They're giving us 6 hours to evacuate, then they'll begin bombardment of the station." Hyun walked to the front of the bridge and stared out at the research station. 53 human scientists and support staff were working there, studying the unusual quantum effects that occurred near this system's binary pulsars. Their research could lead to breakthroughs in faster-than-light travel, new energy sources, maybe even ways to extend human life. It was important work. More importantly, it was human work, being done in space that humans had legally claimed and developed according to all recognized galactic treaties. Captain, his tactical officer, Ensign Jiwoo Nam, spoke quietly, "The Vorthak ships are scanning us. They know we're here." "Let them scan," Hyun said. "Sunmi, are they trying to contact us directly?" "Yes, sir. Multiple hails on standard diplomatic frequencies. They want to negotiate." The word hung in the air like a physical presence. Negotiate. For 3 centuries, that word had been humanity's answer to every crisis. When other species reached for weapons, humans reached for words. When ancient enemies prepared for war, humans prepared peace treaties. When the galaxy teetered on the edge of chaos, humans talked everyone back from the brink. Hyun thought about all the times he had sat across negotiation tables from alien commanders, working through complex agreements that satisfied everyone involved. He remembered the satisfaction of finding solutions that seemed impossible, the relief of preventing bloodshed through careful conversation and patient compromise. "Sir." Sunmi was waiting for orders. "Maintain radio silence," Hyun said quietly. "Begin defensive preparations." The bridge crew exchanged glances. This was not standard procedure. This was not what humans did when faced with threats or ultimatums. But they followed orders. Across human space, similar scenes were playing out. Governor Teeman Park watched Krathan ships take orbit around his agricultural colony and ignored their demands for tribute payments. The colony had been producing food for the entire sector for 40 years, but now the Krathan claimed they needed protection fees to ensure safe shipping. In the old days, Governor Park would have called for human diplomatic intervention. He would have negotiated payment schedules, discussed shared defense agreements, or found some other solution that kept everyone happy. Instead, he ordered his defense platforms to power up their weapons and said nothing. Captain Doyan Chang commanded a merchant vessel that had been stopped by Zephyrian patrol ships demanding inspection of his cargo. The Zephyrians claimed they were looking for contraband weapons, but everyone knew they were really just trying to seize valuable trade goods. 3 months ago, Captain Chang would have requested mediation from the Galactic Trade Commission's human representatives. Now he quietly activated his ship's defensive systems and waited. Lieutenant Commander Mina Kim received urgent messages from a dozen different species asking why humans were not responding to requests for help with territorial disputes, trade disagreements, and border conflicts. Problems that would normally be resolved in days through human mediation were now stretching into weeks of growing tension. She deleted the messages without reading them. The galaxy's peacekeepers had become something else entirely. They moved through space like ghosts, present but unreachable, watching but not responding. The careful balance that human diplomacy had maintained for centuries was beginning to crumble. And humanity said nothing at all. Admiral Doyan Kang had been staring at the tactical display for 6 hours and 17 minutes. The Krathan fleet hung in space like a collection of dark metal sharks, their ships bristling with weapons and armor plating that could withstand most conventional attacks. 8 heavy cruisers, 12 destroyers, and 1 massive dreadnought that dwarfed even his own battleship. They had come to mining station Kepler 442b with simple demands. The asteroid field belonged to them now, they claimed. The humans had 30 minutes to evacuate their people and equipment, or the Krathan would take the station by force. That 30 minutes had stretched into 6 hours of increasingly angry threats transmitted across all frequencies. Admiral, Communications Officer Lieutenant Sunmi Park called from her station, the Krathan commander is hailing us again. Same demands, but has added some new threats about what they'll do to our crew if we don't surrender. Doyan nodded without taking his eyes off the display. The mining station held 47 human workers and their families. They had been extracting rare minerals from these asteroids for 12 years, turning raw rock into materials that would become starship hulls and quantum processors. It was honest work, legal work, protected by treaties that had been negotiated and signed by representatives from dozens of galactic species. 3 months ago, this situation would have played out very differently. The Krathan would have made their demands. The human mining supervisors would have called for diplomatic assistance. Within hours, negotiators would have arrived to work out some compromise that satisfied everyone. Maybe the humans would have agreed to pay mining fees to the Krathan. Maybe they would have offered to share the profits from the operation. Maybe they would have found some completely different solution that no one had thought of before. That was how things worked in the galaxy. Problems arose, humans found solutions, everyone went back to their business. Sir, his tactical officer, Commander Jiwoo Lee, spoke quietly, they're moving into attack formation. All ships are powering up their main weapons. Doyan finally looked away from the display. His bridge crew was watching him with expressions of confusion and concern. These were good people, experienced officers who had served with him for years. They knew him as a careful commander who always looked for peaceful solutions before resorting to violence. He had never fired the first shot in any engagement during his 20-year career. Admiral, Lieutenant Commander Mina Cho said from the weapons control station, should I prepare warning shots? We could target their sensor arrays, show them we're serious without causing casualties. Warning shots. The traditional human response to aggressive actions by other species. Fire across their bow, demonstrate superior firepower, then open negotiations from a position of strength. It worked most of the time. Other species expected it from humans. They counted on it. The lead Krathan ship is locking targeting sensors on the mining station, Commander Lee reported. They're not bluffing, sir. If we don't respond in the next few minutes, they're going to start shooting civilians. Doyan thought about the 4 to 7 people on that station. Engineers and geologists and mining technicians who had never hurt anyone. Families who had made homes in the prefabricated modules between the asteroids, children who played in the low-gravity recreational areas, teachers who ran schools and converted cargo containers. He thought about all the times he had sat across negotiation tables from Krathan commanders, working out careful agreements that respected both human and Krathan interests. He remembered the satisfaction of finding solutions that prevented bloodshed, the relief of turning potential enemies into trading partners. Sir. Commander Lee was waiting for orders. The Krathan dreadnought's main guns were glowing with stored energy. Doyan could see the heat signatures building on his tactical display. In 60 seconds, maybe less, those weapons would fire on the mining station. 4 to 7 human beings would die because he had hesitated to act. All ships, he said into his command microphone, this is Admiral Kang. Target the lead Krathan vessel. Prepare to fire on my command. Sir, Lieutenant Commander Cho said, are you sure? Once we shoot first, there's no going back. The Krathan will call this an act of war. Doyan looked out through the main viewer at the Krathan fleet. He could see running lights moving along the hulls of their ships as they prepared for battle. These were not diplomats or traders. These were warriors who had come to take what they wanted by force. They had given humans 30 minutes to abandon 12 years of work, to flee from legally claimed territory, to surrender to threats and intimidation. Admiral, his sensor officer called out, the Krathan flagship is beginning its bombardment run. They're moving toward the station. For 3 centuries, humans had been the galaxy's peacemakers. They had negotiated settlements, mediated disputes, and prevented countless wars through patient diplomacy. They had talked when others wanted to fight. They had found compromise when others demanded victory. Fire, Doyan said. The battleship Inchin's main plasma cannons discharged with the power of a small star. The beams crossed space in less than a second, striking the Krathan dreadnought with surgical precision. The massive ship's shields flared and died instantly. Its armor plating vaporized. The entire vessel disappeared in a ball of blue-white fire that lit up the asteroid field like a new sun. The remaining Krathan ships scattered immediately, their formation breaking apart as individual captains realized they were facing something they had never encountered before. Humans who shot first and asked questions later. Sir, Lieutenant Commander Ari Yoon called from her monitoring station, we're receiving transmissions from the retreating Krathan ships. They're asking why we didn't warn them. Why we didn't try to negotiate. Doyan watched pieces of the destroyed dreadnought tumble past his view screen, glowing metal fragments that had once been a ship carrying 3,000 Krathan warriors. Because we're done talking, he said. Within hours, news of the Kepler incident had spread across the galaxy through hyperspace communication networks. Humanity had fired the first shot in what everyone was now calling the Silent War. Dr. Mina Seo sat in her laboratory aboard the research vessel Busan, surrounded by holographic displays that told a story the galaxy was still trying to understand. Charts and graphs floated in the air around her, each one showing the same impossible pattern. In 6 months, 17 major conflicts had ended. Not through treaties or negotiations or careful diplomatic work, but through something much simpler and more terrifying. They had ended because one side had been completely destroyed. She touched a control panel and brought up the tactical report from the Vorthak expansion zone. 3 weeks ago, the crystalline beings had been advancing through neutral space, claiming territory that had belonged to no one for centuries. Their fleet of 60 ships had moved in perfect formation, following ancient Vorthak military traditions that emphasized overwhelming numbers and coordinated attacks. The fleet had been found drifting in space 2 days later. Every single ship had been destroyed, but not randomly. They had been arranged in precise geometric patterns, forming complex mathematical shapes that could be seen from light years away. Each vessel had been targeted with surgical accuracy, hit in exactly the right spot to disable its main power systems while leaving the hull mostly intact. It was like a warning written in the language of debris and death. Dr. Seo, her research assistant, Lieutenant Jiwoo Kang, called from across the laboratory, I've finished analyzing the Zephyrian conflict data. The results are unusual. Mina turned away from the Vorthak display and walked over to Jiwoo's workstation. The young officer had been studying the end of what historians were already calling the Honor War, a conflict between 2 Zephyrian warrior castes that had been fighting for control of their species' most sacred breeding grounds. What did you find? Mina asked. Jiwoo pulled up a tactical recording that showed the final battle between the Red Wing and Blue Wing castes. Hundreds of insectoid warriors had been engaged in ritual combat, following the ancient codes that govern how their people settled disputes. Single combat, matched weapons, formal challenges and responses. Then human ships had arrived. Watch this, Jiwoo said, pointing to the display. The human fleet doesn't acknowledge any of the traditional challenge protocols. They don't respond to the formal dueling requests. They just attack. On the screen, sleek human vessels moved through the Zephyrian formation like shadows. Their weapons fired without warning, targeting command ships and supply vessels with clinical precision. Within minutes, both warrior castes had been scattered, their ancient ritual combat turned into a chaotic retreat. The Zephyrians kept transmitting honor challenges even as they were being destroyed, Jiwoo continued. They couldn't understand why the humans weren't following the rules of engagement. Mina nodded grimly. She had seen similar reports from across the galaxy. Species that had been fighting each other for centuries suddenly found themselves facing human forces that did not care about their traditions, their honor codes, or their ancient grudges. The humans simply ended the conflicts in the most efficient way possible. She walked to the laboratory's main viewport and looked out at the patrol fleet gliding past in perfect silence. 7 human warships moved in formation through this sector, their hulls dark against the stars. No running lights, no identification signals, no communication transmissions. They were like ghosts made of metal and ceramic, present but unreachable. "Computer," she said, "display the conflict resolution statistics for the past 6 months." A new hologram appeared in front of her, showing data that would have been impossible to believe just a year ago. Before humanity stopped talking, the average interspecies conflict lasted 847 standard days and resulted in casualties numbering in the hundreds of thousands. Diplomatic resolution required an average of 234 formal meetings, 1,847 preliminary negotiations, and 56 treaty drafts. Now, conflicts lasted an average of 6.3 days and ended with the complete elimination of one side or the other. "The efficiency is remarkable," she murmured, though the word felt wrong in her mouth. Efficient was not how she would have described the systematic destruction of entire fleets, but the numbers did not lie. Her communication panel chimed with an incoming message from Admiral Timinyo, the commander of the human forces in this sector. The message was encrypted with military-grade security, marked for her eyes only. "Dr. Seo," the Admiral's recorded voice said, "I need your analysis of the behavioral changes we're seeing across the galaxy. High Command wants to know if our new strategy is having the desired effect." Mina activated her own recording system and began her response. "Admiral, the patterns are clear. Every major species has modified their behavior significantly. Conflict initiation rates have dropped by 92%. Territorial disputes are being resolved internally rather than escalating to military action. Trade disagreements are settled quickly and quietly." She paused, looking at the data streams flowing across her displays. The galaxy is learning that unresolved conflicts attract human attention. And that attention is always fatal for at least one of the parties involved. Through the viewport, she watched a small convoy of merchant ships from 3 different species traveling together through what had been a contested trade route just months ago. Krathan, Zephyrian, and Vorthak vessels flying in the same formation, their crews working together to transport goods across the sector. 6 months ago, those same species would have been shooting at each other. Now they were cooperating, sharing navigation data and coordinating their schedules. Not because they had suddenly become friends, but because they all understood what would happen if their disputes attracted the wrong kind of attention. "The ghost fleets are more effective than any diplomatic mission we ever sent," Mina continued in her report. "They enforce peace through the simple threat of overwhelming retaliation. Species that might have spent years fighting each other now resolve their differences in hours, because they know the alternative is extinction." She finished her recording and sent it through the encrypted channels to Admiral Yo. Then she returned to her research, studying the data that showed how humanity had become the galaxy's silent enforcers. The old saying had been that peace was the absence of war. Now it seemed that peace was the presence of something much more dangerous, human ships that patrolled the darkness, watching and waiting for the next conflict that needed to be ended. The Galactic Council chamber looked different when Ambassador Gina Park walked through its massive doors for the first time in 8 months. The usual chaos was gone. No delegates shouting across the vast space, no heated arguments echoing from the upper galleries, no emergency sessions being called every few hours to deal with the latest crisis. Instead, there was an eerie quiet that reminded Gina of a library or a temple. Representatives from dozens of species sat in their assigned sections, speaking in whispers when they spoke at all. The Krathan delegation, which had once filled their section with loud declarations and territorial demands, now consisted of only 3 individuals who kept their voices barely above a whisper. The Zephyrian warrior castes, famous for their ceremonial battle chants that could shake the chamber's walls, sat in complete silence. Their wings were folded against their bodies in a posture that Gina recognized as submission. She had seen that same posture on the battlefield recordings from the Honor War. Even the Vorthak, whose crystalline bodies naturally created musical tones when they moved, seemed to be deliberately keeping their movements small and quiet. Their section, once filled with the constant chiming of their communication methods, was nearly silent. Gina walked to the central podium where she had given hundreds of speeches over the years. Speeches about compromise and understanding, about finding common ground between species that had been enemies for millennia, about the importance of dialogue in solving even the most complex problems. She had believed in those words once. She had dedicated her life to the idea that any conflict could be resolved if people were willing to sit down and talk to each other with patience and good faith. Members of the Galactic Council, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the silent chamber, you have requested an explanation for humanity's recent actions. You want to know why we stopped participating in your debates, why we stopped mediating your conflicts, why we stopped trying to find peaceful solutions to your problems. She paused and looked around the chamber. In the Delphine section, the aquatic representatives floated motionlessly in their water-filled observation pods. Normally they would be creating complex patterns with their tentacles, the flowing movements that served as their form of applause or disagreement. Today they were perfectly still. For 3,000 years, Gina continued, we tried to solve your problems with words. When the Krathan Empire wanted to expand into Federation space, we talked them out of it. When the mining guilds fought over asteroid rights, we found compromise solutions. When ancient enemies prepared for war, we somehow convinced them to choose peace instead. She activated a holographic display that showed the statistics Dr. Mina Seo had compiled. Numbers that told the story of humanity's long history as the galaxy's peacekeepers. We mediated 47,000 territorial disputes. We negotiated 23,000 trade agreements. We prevented 156 major wars and countless smaller conflicts. We spent trillions of credits on diplomatic missions, peace conferences, and cultural exchange programs designed to help you understand each other better. The display changed, showing casualty figures that made several delegates look away. We lost 2.3 billion human lives in the process. Diplomats killed by terrorists who opposed peace treaties. Peacekeepers murdered by extremists who preferred war to negotiation. Aid workers executed by warlords who saw kindness as weakness. Gina's voice remained steady, but something cold had crept into her tone. Entire generations of humans died believing that words could overcome your instinct for violence. We sent our best and brightest to serve as mediators, negotiators, and ambassadors. We taught our children that patience and understanding could solve any problem. She deactivated the display and looked directly at the Krathan section. 3 months ago, your forces attacked mining station Kepler 442b. 4 to 7 human civilians working legally in territory that belonged to them under treaties your own government had signed. Your commanders demanded that these families abandon 12 years of work and flee because the Krathan Empire had decided it wanted their resources. The lead Krathan representative, a massive being whose scales had turned pale with fear, said nothing. He did not even meet her gaze. In the old days, this would have triggered weeks of emergency negotiations. Human diplomats would have rushed to the scene with proposals and counter-proposals. We would have found some compromise that let your people save face while protecting our civilians. We would have talked until everyone was satisfied. Gina's expression hardened. Instead, Admiral Doyan Kang destroyed your flagship and scattered your fleet without saying a single word. No warnings, no ultimatums, no final chances for negotiation. Just overwhelming force applied with surgical precision. She turned to address the Zephyrian section. Your warrior caste spent 6 centuries fighting over breeding territory that could have easily been shared. Every attempt at human mediation was rejected because your honor codes required single combat to settle disputes. So we stopped trying to work within your codes and ended your war in 6 minutes. The chamber was so quiet that Gina could hear the soft hum of the life support systems. No one interrupted her. No one called for points of order or demanded the right to respond. They all knew what happened to species that drew too much attention from humanity these days. The galaxy is at peace now, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. Trade routes that were contested for centuries are now shared without conflict. Border disputes that had lasted millennia have been resolved overnight. Species that had been enemies since before humans discovered fire now cooperate to avoid attracting our attention. She walked away from the podium, then turned back for one final statement. The war began the day we stopped talking. We won it by making silence more terrifying than any threat we could have spoken. Remember that the next time you consider starting a conflict that might require our intervention. The chamber remained quiet for a full hour after she left.